55 years old. 2 weeks after a change I almost didn't make, my wife asked me what had happened to me. It wasn't a question about health. It wasn't concern. It was the kind of question a woman asks when she's looking at a man she had stopped expecting to see again. I'm 55, and in that moment, I felt like I was 38. I'm not talking about a little blue pill. I'm not talking about any prescription. I'm talking about one simple thing, one single change in my routine that most doctors never suggested to me, never mentioned, never explained why it would work. And it worked. If you're watching this right now, I know where you are. I know that feeling of waking up in the morning and realizing something is gone. Not all at once, but slowly. And you kept letting it go because you told yourself it was just age. I told myself the same thing. Stay until the end. What made the difference for me comes later, and it's worth the time. I used to be a long-haul driver. I spent days on the road, came home on weekends, and even tired, there was an energy waiting for me somewhere deep down when I walked through the door. A kind of warmth, a want that didn't need an invitation, that disappeared so gradually I never caught the exact moment it was gone. I think the moment I finally admitted it was on a Friday evening. I had come home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. My wife was in the living room, and I just went straight to bed. I wasn't sick. I wasn't exhausted. I was indifferent, and that was worse than any tiredness. I lay there staring at the ceiling thinking, when did I become this man? There was no answer, only the feeling, heavy, dense, that something had changed inside me without my permission, and that I didn't know how to undo it. What came after the indifference was worse. It was the quiet lie you start telling yourself. I'm just tired. It's a phase. We're not young anymore. Every excuse pushed the problem a little further forward, as if it would sort itself out by the next morning. It never did. It just went deeper. I tried not to let it show. I stayed up later, pretended I was distracted, found reasons to come to bed after she was already asleep. She never said anything, but 30 years alongside the same person teaches you to read her silence, and her silence said everything. I went to see a doctor. It wasn't a comfortable appointment. I was 53 at the time, felt less than that in every way that mattered, and the doctor listened for maybe 4 minutes before he started writing. He prescribed the medications he gives everyone. He told me it was natural for my age. He sent me home with the feeling that I had gone there to waste time. The medication worked, but it was like jump-starting a car. The car moved, but the engine wasn't right. I knew it. She knew it. And for a while, we both pretended that was enough. It wasn't. What bothered me wasn't only the physical side. It was that I had lost the desire before I lost the ability. The wanting had gone first, and no doctor had told me about that. None of them had looked at me and said, the problem may be happening somewhere the prescription doesn't reach. There's a neighbor of mine, older than me by about 8 years, goes by the initial R, always been a quiet man, reserved, the kind you greet at the gate and don't expect a long conversation from. But there's a quality in him I always noticed without ever putting it into words. He seems present in everything he does. He seems to be inside his own life. His wife has eyes that tell a story. I can't explain it any other way. One day I was in the garden, he walked past, and we ended up talking longer than usual. I don't know how we got on the subject. Maybe I let something slip without realizing. Maybe he's more observant than he looks. He said, "You're tired in a way that isn't physical." It wasn't a question. It was an observation. And it landed hard because it was true. I went quiet. So did he. Then he mentioned something he had been using. Not as a medical recommendation, not as a pitch. He said it the way someone mentioned something they figured out on their own, something that worked, and they're not certain it'll work for anyone else, but they think it's worth knowing about. For a long time, I wanted nothing to do with supplements. I had an old resistance to that whole world. In my mind, it was full of promises and disappointments, pretty packaging, and nothing inside. And if doctors with years of training hadn't been able to get there, What was a plant capsule going to do? But R isn't the kind of man who speaks without reason. And I was at a point where the cost of trying was smaller than the cost of staying the same. He told me about two things. The first was maca, a root that comes from Peru, used for centuries. It's not about testosterone directly. He explained it simply. The body has a communication system between the brain and the hormones, and this root helps that signal flow more freely. Desire doesn't start in the body. It starts somewhere that most standard prescriptions don't reach. The second was horny goatweed, an eastern plant with 2,000 years of use, known for its natural effect on circulation. He didn't use technical terms. He said the body needs flow, that without flow the response slows down, and that this plant helps blood reach where it needs to reach, without forcing anything. Those two things together, in a formula he'd found, were what he had been using for a while. I went home and did nothing for 2 days. The resistance was still there, but it was smaller. On the third night, I opened the link he had given me. I read through it. Didn't buy right away. Went to sleep. Woke up, read it again, and then I bought. What I noticed didn't happen on day 1, not on day 2, but somewhere around the 3rd week, maybe the 4th, something subtle began. It wasn't a dramatic shift. It was more like when you open a window that's been shut too long and the air comes in slowly, but you feel it. The mornings started being different. I'd wake up with a sensation I had forgotten existed, a presence in the body, a kind of warmth underneath, not urgency, recognition, like the body saying, "I'm still here." I wasn't expecting anything. That's why, when I noticed it, everything inside me stopped for a moment. The link is in the description if you want to look through it at your own pace. I'm not telling you to buy anything. I'm saying it's worth reading. But that was only part of what changed. There's more, and that's what I want to tell you now. The second thing I discovered, this one by accident, on my own, was what chronic stress does to a man's desire. Not acute stress, not crisis stress, the everyday kind. The kind that has you waking up already thinking about what needs fixing, lying down still processing what wasn't. That kind of stress releases a hormone the body uses as an emergency signal. When that signal stays active too long, the body starts switching off things it considers secondary. Sexual desire is one of the first things the body shuts down when it thinks it's in survival mode. Think of it this way. Imagine a city rationing power. The essential lights stay on. The storefronts, the signs, the decorations, they go dark. Desire is a storefront. When the emergency system is running, the storefront goes dark. There's research out of a major university, a long-term study following men between 50 and 70, that found a direct correlation between elevated stress hormone levels and the drop in desire, not a weak correlation. One of the most consistent findings in the study. What I started doing was simple, and I came to it through frustration more than wisdom. I started building a deliberate gap into my evening. Not meditation, nothing elaborate. A period, 30 minutes, sometimes 40, where I did something with my hands and nothing with my head. For me, it was working in the garden. For someone else, it might be something different. The activity doesn't matter. The disengagement does. A study from a research institute in the Netherlands followed men who introduced this kind of routine break into their evenings and tracked their self-reported desire over 12 weeks. The shift wasn't marginal. The men who maintained the habit consistently showed measurable changes in the hormonal signals tied to desire. The most common mistake is thinking you need to calm down mentally, and then lying on the couch watching something loud and fast and calling that rest. That is not rest. That keeps the emergency signal running. The body needs a gap where the signal actually drops. And for most men, that gap has to be constructed deliberately because the world doesn't offer it on its own. The instruction is this: every evening, 30 minutes minimum, no screens, something physical or manual at a slow pace. Not a workout, not performance. Just the hands doing something while the mind goes quiet. Do it consistently for 3 weeks before judging anything. If you found something here that sounds like what you've been going through, leave a comment, subscribe if you want to keep following what I share, and like the video if it's worth something to you. There are a lot of men watching this kind of content alone, in silence, and every time the algorithm shows it to someone who needs it, it's because someone else said it was worth showing. That matters to me. The third thing took me the longest to understand, because it wasn't about what I was doing. It was about what I was eating, or rather, what I had quietly stopped eating without a plan. I had, over the years, done what most men my age do without realizing it. I had gradually reduced fat in my diet. Not dramatically, not with a formal decision. Just the accumulation of 100 small choices that added up. Less red meat, lower fat versions of things. Less of what I used to eat at 40. Nobody told me that fat is the raw material the body uses to manufacture the hormones that drive desire. Not a metaphor. Literally. Cholesterol, the thing doctors told me to worry about, is the molecule the body converts, through a chain of steps, into the hormones that keep a man feeling like a man. There's a study from a nutrition research center that tracked dietary fat intake in men over 50 and found that those in the lowest third of fat consumption had significantly lower hormone levels tied to desire than those in the upper third, even when all other factors were controlled. The mechanism isn't complicated. No raw material, no production. The household analogy that made it click for me: think of a factory that makes something. If you cut the supply of the base material in half, the factory doesn't collapse. It just produces less of the thing, slowly, consistently, less. The most common mistake is cutting all saturated fat after a doctor raises a flag about cholesterol, and not realizing you've just reduced the supply chain for something your body needs, for reasons that have nothing to do with your heart. The instruction: put back whole eggs, put back grass-fed butter or a quality animal fat in moderate, regular amounts. Don't do it all at once. Do it gradually. Observe. This is not a program. It's a correction. Give it 6 weeks of consistency before expecting anything to shift. The fourth thing is one that almost no man talks about, because it sounds too simple to be real. But I've lived it, and I've since spoken to enough men my age to know it's more common than anyone admits. Isolation. Not loneliness in the dramatic sense, not absence of people. The specific isolation of never talking to another man about what's actually happening inside you. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying something alone for too long. It doesn't show up as sadness necessarily. It shows up as numbness, as distance, as a vague feeling that the life you're living is slightly to the side of the one you used to have. And here's the part nobody talks about. That kind of prolonged emotional isolation has measurable effects on the hormonal signals that govern desire. Not metaphorical effects, biological ones. When a man has no space to be honest about what he's going through, no conversation, no outlet, no mirror, the body registers it as another form of chronic stress. And you already know what chronic stress does. Research from a behavioral health center that followed men in midlife found that those who had at least one consistent, honest social connection, not general friendship, but the kind where actual things get said, showed better maintenance of hormonal markers related to vitality than those who didn't, independent of other lifestyle factors. The mistake most men make is confusing presence with connection. Being around people is not the same as being honest with someone. You can be in a room full of people every single day and still be carrying everything completely alone. What I did was not dramatic. I started talking to R more. Not about sports, not about practical things, about what was actually happening. It was uncomfortable at first. It got easier. And something about not carrying it alone changed something in me that I still can't fully explain, but that I felt. The instruction: find one man, someone you already know well enough to trust, and say one true thing to him about how you've been, not a speech, one true sentence. See what happens from there. I'm 55. I live quietly. A house with a small garden, evenings that belong to me and to her. I feel, most mornings, like a man who made a decision at the right time, not because I found some secret, because I stopped assuming the answer was in the places I had already looked, and I paid attention when someone who seemed to have figured it out said something worth hearing. The central thing I want to leave you with is this. The loss of desire in a man past 50 is almost never one thing. It's a combination, hormonal, chemical, emotional, habitual, that builds slowly and quietly over years, which means the path back is also built slowly, one change at a time, one thing at a time, but it does get built. Tell me in the comments, have you ever talked to another man, truly talked, about what's been happening with you? Or have you been carrying this on your own? I'm asking because the answer to that question tells me more about where a man is than almost anything else. The body you have at 55 is not a fixed thing. It is a living system that responds to what you give it, to what you stop holding back, to whether you decide to pay attention. But here's what I learned the hard way. That system responds differently depending on when you start. Not because there's a cliff edge, because the longer certain processes run without being addressed, the more work it takes to move them back. The response is still there. It just asks for more, the longer you wait. I nearly waited too long. I know what more years of the same would have looked like. More mornings keeping a careful distance. More evenings ending in a silence that wasn't peace. More of the slow, quiet feeling of becoming a smaller version of the man I used to be. Not all at once, just one imperceptible morning at a time. What I found, both what I shared in this video and what's in the description, they don't replace each other. They work together. The habits clear the ground. The formula supports what the habits alone don't fully reach. Neither one is the whole answer. Together, they're closer to it than anything else I found. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Go there, read through it, and decide for yourself. No pressure, no countdown. Just information from someone who went looking and found something worth sharing. The men I've spoken with who turned things around had one thing in common. Not a supplement, not a specific habit. They made a decision, one real decision, not to stay where they were. Everything that followed came from that. That's the only thing I can't put in a description link. That part is yours to make.